Assassination of President John Kennedy, theories of conspiracy have come and gone. Some stay. One that's endured theorizes that the mob somehow may have been behind the shooting. Rita reports tonight on that theory and the evidence as we continue our series, 25 Years.
3 shots were fired at President
Kennedy has been assassinated.
Oswald has been shot.
Was the assassination of John F. Kennedy a mafia hit?
I really don't know what the situation is about. Nobody.
The Warren Commission found that Lee Harvey Oswald, an unstable, oddball character, acted alone and was then killed by Jack Ruby, another unstable, oddball character who acted alone. But studying evidence unearthed later, the House Assassinations Committee and other scholars have found new relationships linking both Ruby and Oswald to organized crime.
What we did that the Warren Commission didn't do is explore possible associations between Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby. Not directly, but through secondary people.
The mob links begin here in New Orleans, where Lee Harvey Oswald spent much of his youth living with his uncle, Dux Moret, who operated right here on this French Quarter block as a bookmaker in the gambling network run by the boss of the New Orleans mob, Carlos Marcello. Marcello was a key target of Attorney General Robert Kennedy's anti-mafia crusade. Kennedy even had him temporarily deported to Guatemala.
They just grabbed the guy. He couldn't call his wife. As he said, I couldn't even get a toothbrush or a little cash, so a change of clothes. It was very well known in southern Louisiana that Carlos Marcello had sworn to eventually get the Kennedys.
And during a meeting at Marcello's fishing camp outside New Orleans, the mobster was quite specific, according to a former private investigator who says he got to know Marcello while working undercover.
And he said to me, what you do is you cut off the head of the dog and then the tail dies. And I had instant recognition on that sentence.
What did you think it meant?
I think it meant you killed the president and Bobby is taken care of.
Even back when he was a Senate investigator, Robert Kennedy had given mobsters other reasons to hate the family.
You tell us anything about any of your operations, or you just giggle every time I ask you a question?
Declined to answer because I honestly believe my answer might tend to incriminate me.
I thought only little girls giggled, Mr. Giancana.
Chicago mobster Sam Giancana. The same Sam Giancana who was close to John Kennedy's mistress, Judith Exner. She now claims she set up a meeting between Giancana and the president-to-be at Kennedy's request.
And I asked him why, and he said he thought he could help him with the election. And I proceeded to do so.
She says later Giancana joked about delivering Chicago votes for Kennedy.
He used to make sarcastic remarks to me that your boyfriend wouldn't be president if it wasn't for me.
So according to mob theorists, the mafia felt double-crossed by Robert Kennedy's vendetta. And the theory goes Mafia Chief Marcello recruited the nephew of one of his bookies as the assassin, Lee Oswald, using as a go-between David Ferry, a shady New Orleans type who died mysteriously in 1967. As for Jack Ruby's ties to the mob, they allegedly went back to his boyhood in Chicago and continued in Dallas.
The bar he ran was part of a circuit with B-girls, prostitutes, and what have you. The place he got his girls from immediately was the show bar in Louisiana, connected to Carlos Marcello.
If mobsters did recruit Jack Ruby, they came to the right man. He was a well-known cop buff with many friends on the Dallas police force. And he had no trouble gaining access to this police department garage and moving in close enough to fire the shot that killed Lee Harvey Oswald.
The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
But despite those cryptic remarks after his trial, Ruby never claimed he was a hired gun. And others who've studied the evidence totally reject the mob theory.
Mafia hitmen are closed-mouthed, unemotional killers who have a long track record of effectively carrying out murder contracts for the mob. Oswald and Ruby are the most unlikely mafia hitmen that anyone could possibly imagine.
The one man who might know all, Carlos Marcello, is in federal prison on racketeering charges and refused to be interviewed. And even those who support the mob theory admit that there is not enough proof to support a prosecutable case. The U.S. Justice Department recently announced that it will not look further into the assassination unless some new evidence is available. So we may never know whether a plot to kill President Kennedy was hatched in this city. Rita, CBS News, New Orleans.
Tomorrow night, David Martin on the assassination, the CIA, and Cuba. For now, that's tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather, see you tomorrow. Good night. The theories surrounding the assassination of President John Kennedy, the most troubling to some investigators, involves the CIA and Cuba. Some believe that Lee Harvey Oswald perhaps killed the president on his own to impress the Cubans. Others think it went beyond that. In our continuing series, David Martin reports tonight on what we know and don't know about Oswald, Castro, and the CIA 25 years later.
Something is terribly wrong.
3 shots were fired at President
Kennedy has been assassinated.
Oswald has been shot.
The Warren Commission knew that Fidel Castro had as much reason to see John Kennedy dead as anyone. Ever since the CIA-sponsored invasion at the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy had been trying to overthrow him. What the Warren Commission didn't know was that the CIA had been plotting not just to overthrow Castro, but to assassinate him.
If the Warren Commission would have been told by the CIA, as they should have been told, that there were CIA plots against Castro, I think there would have been an even more intensive investigation of the possibility of a retaliation by Castro.
It was not until 1975, long after the trail had gone cold, that a blue ribbon panel headed by then Vice President Rockefeller finally forced the CIA to admit it had been plotting to kill Castro. One of the plots involved Rolando Cubela, a one-time confidant of Castro's. Now living in Spain, Cubela talked publicly for the first time about his plan to stage a coup.
It was a general plan which included the possibility of eliminating Castro.
Cubela was assured his plan had been blessed by the president's brother.
It's true that somebody came from the presidential executive office who said he came in the name of the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy.
In one of history's most bitter ironies, on the same day President Kennedy was killed, a CIA officer met with Cubela in Paris and gave him an assassination device, a ballpoint pen fitted with a hypodermic needle.
There was a phone call telling him the meeting had to be interrupted because the president had been killed.
Cubela eventually was arrested and served 14 years in prison. It seems Castro had known about the plots against his life all along. He told Daniel Harker of the Associated Press, quote, "If U.S. leaders are aiding terrorist plans to eliminate Cuban leaders, they themselves will not be safe."
I think it was a message of, we know that the CIA, and of course, by inference, the U.S. government is trying to kill me and other Cuban leaders.
Harker's story appeared in the New Orleans Times-Picayune at a time when Lee Harvey Oswald was living there, working as a one-man representative for a pro-Castro group called the Fair Play for Cuba Committee.
He left New Orleans within several weeks after reading that in the newspaper, went back to Dallas, went down to Mexico, tried to get to Cuba through the Cuban embassy, through the Russian embassy, failed to do so.
But the Warren Commission was never told about a woman named Luisa Calderon who worked for the Cuban embassy, a lead which lay buried in CIA files until discovered by an investigator for a House committee.
The agency in 1963 received reliable information from a defector that Calderon was a Cuban agent, an agent of Cuban intelligence, that Calderon had had a relationship of one kind with Oswald, had been seen in his presence.
When the House committee tried to interview Calderon, the Cuban government said she was ill, another trail gone cold.
And you get the feeling that the agency was not providing information to the Warren Commission because it was concerned that some of those other leads, which may have touched on the Cubans, might have resulted in discovery of the anti-Castro plots. which would have been a terrible embarrassment.
When Oswald shot Kennedy from this window at the Texas School Book Depository, no one seemed more shaken than Fidel Castro. French journalist Jean Daniel was interviewing him when the news arrived.
Castro went white. He said it was terrible. He was afraid people would think Cubans were involved.
Oswald got this far, about 2 miles from the scene of the crime, before he was stopped by Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit. Oswald shot and killed Tippit and was arrested soon after. But where was Oswald headed if Tippit hadn't stopped him?
He was headed in a direction that was consistent, at least, with his going south to Mexico, and from there he might have hoped that he would be admitted into Cuba secretly, probably. This would be his hopes, as a kind of a return of a favor for having killed Kennedy.
Attorney General Robert Kennedy felt the CIA's plots against Castro had triggered a retaliatory plot against his brother. At least that's what CIA Director John McCone said the Attorney General intimated to him on the day of the assassination.
He did say that the Attorney General was expressing anguish at the possibility that the government's activities hostile to Castro might have led to the assassination.
Whether or not the CIA's assassination plot set off a chain of events that ended at the Texas School Book Depository, we will probably never know. But we do know that keeping those plots secret from the Warren Commission forever undermined the credibility of one of the most important investigations of the 20th century. David Martin, CBS News, Dallas.
Tomorrow night on the CBS Evening News, Bill McLaughlin will examine Lee Harvey Oswald's missing year in the Soviet Union. And then later tomorrow night in primetime, CBS News will take you back for 2 hours to that day a president died and the 3 days of national mourning which followed. We hope you and your family will share 4 days in November. Tomorrow night at 9 Eastern Time, 8 Central. For now, that's tonight's CBS Evening News. Dan Rather. See you tomorrow. Good night.